Wild, as in wild woman, is who an individual is at their most authentic self. One of the leading questions I had was from Simone de Beauvoir when she was exploring the question of who is a woman before she is made. So it's
Mm.
this premise that we are born into a patriarchal culture and system. We're always swimming in that patriarchal water. And so to find out who we are without that lens of patriarchy is, in my conclusion, ultimately impossible. But we can try. We can try to recognize, okay, at least we're in this patriarchal water, and what is mine in it? What belongs to me? And the wild part is what belongs to me.
In today's busy world, how can we find the inspiration, knowledge, and energy to live a healthy and empowered life? If we balance and harmonize our mind, exercise our body, live according to the laws of nature, and connect to spirit, can we find a way to heal, become our authentic self, and live our purpose with love? I am your hostess, Amy Fournier, and welcome back to Awakening Aphrodite. Hey everybody, I want to be part of the solution, don't you? Well, it starts with you and your choices and what you put on your skin, what you put in your body, what you put in your mind. Did you know that I have an e-store and a lot of my favorite products that I use every single day that have changed my life for the better are in there? You'll find things such as frequency harmonizing music, beautiful organic skincare products, supplements, healthy snacks, photon red light therapy, biogeometry products and jewelry, and even my favorite cacao with dark chocolate, yummy goodness and health. You can find all of these products and more on my website, amyfournier.com. Just go to the tab e-store there, go to the recommended products and scroll down and have fun shopping. Use my coupon codes, save some money, and let me know what you think. Everybody, I'm sure you know how important it is to help your body properly detoxify. My goodness, if we really looked at how many toxins we are exposed to, toxins in the air, toxins inside homes, mold, furnishings, as well as food sources, all these things that our bodies are dealing with, we got to help it out. Energy Bits algae tabs are nutrition powerhouses that are great not only for detoxification, but also for energy and for beauty. I love Energy Bits because they have only one ingredient, algae, which is a superfood. They're 100% natural. They're also vegan, super high in antioxidants, high in omega-3 fatty acids, which can help with brain function, moods, reduce inflammation and muscle soreness. And this is great for people who don't like to eat a lot of vegetables. I mean, this is like a superfood. I can't emphasize enough. This is why I have it on my website. You can use my coupon code AMYF at checkout and you can save a whopping 20%. Please try them. Let me know what you think. I promise you won't be disappointed. My friends, you're in for a treat today. We are going to talk about your wild woman. Where is she? Does she exist? Are you living her in your regular life? Well, if you're like most women, particularly midlife women, women tend to become conscious of the fact that culture has pretty much domesticated us. And we become aware that there's a part of us that just wants to let it all rip and just be raw and honest and real and feel. And we've lost touch with our instincts and our intuitive nature. You know, that's a big part of my show. We talk about that a lot on my show, is bringing that back, that feminine intuition, that knowing and that primal strength that we all have as women. Today, I'm excited to talk about the wild woman and the wild woman archetype because this is an expression of our innate soulful essence. Many women with the patriarchy that we have now have become overly domesticated, overly civil, almost from birth. And this expresses not only in our sexuality, but also how we conduct our relationships, not only with others, but with ourselves. When a woman becomes conscious of the wild woman archetype that's within her, she then becomes free to explore sexuality and relationships on her own terms. That is from today's guest, Dr. Stacey Shelby. I'm thrilled to share her with you today because she's got a fabulous book, Tracking the Wild Woman Archetype. That's fantastic. We get into a beautiful discussion about Artemis, who is the goddess archetype of the wild woman, and our girl Aphrodite, and that dichotomy, that play between the two, the independent, courageous, on a mission, protect the innocent Artemis, which is the warrior goddess, and the goddess of relationship and bonding and love and beauty and connection, Aphrodite. How can we live these two at the same time, simultaneously? I know it's something I strive to do, and you probably do too. So there's no one better to talk to than Dr. Stacey Shelby, because she's an author, a speaker, an educator, and a depth psychotherapist. She's also a registered clinical counselor and a certified clinical dream tender. She studied plant medicines and yoga traditions, taught at the teaching facility at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California. And she holds a master's and a Ph.D. in depth psychology with specialization in Jungian and Archetypal Studies. We have a beautiful discussion. I know you're going to love it today. And if you're interested in this type of thing, with bringing out these goddess archetypes and these divine qualities in you that we all go through at different stages in our lives as women, you might want to hop on my email list, because you might want to learn about my upcoming online course, Goddess Rising, Thriving Through the 4 Stages of Womanhood. I'm super excited to bring this to you. We're going to have a beautiful online community with regular live meetings and lots of study content through the different stages of your life, how we vacillate and tap in to all these beautiful goddess, powerful essences in all of us in our everyday life. All right, without further ado, let's now join Dr. Stacey Shelby. Enjoy. And welcome back to the show, everybody. My guest today is Dr. Stacey Shelby. Stacey, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Amy. Great to be here.
I am really, really grateful to finally meet you and have you on the show. I've been studying your work for a while now. I feel like we are just kindred soul sisters. So many times I found myself listening to stuff you said or reading stuff you write, and I'm like, that's exactly how I feel, or that's how I would have answered the question. And it's just such a beautiful thing when that happens. Like, it literally warmed my soul. So thank you again for coming on the show, Stacey.
My pleasure. Thanks. It is so wonderful and fun to find kindred spirits and women that are forging the way of, finding themselves and their soul path and adhering to the soul call, and even just recognizing that that's a thing, right? So
Yes.
to be here and sharing this space with you. Thank you.
And you had a really interesting situation that apparently your own romantic struggle led you to a lot of the work that you're doing. Do I have that right? That at least it led to your doctoral research. Would you like to share your journey? I did mention it in the intro a little bit. Yeah. Oh,
yeah, of course. It's funny. I am a very private person, and yet, right, I can't help but, what I know through experience and
Yes.
self-reflection, not through reading per se, even though I am a scholar. So yes, I was definitely in the alchemical flames of transformation because of romantic love being the catalyst. And so that was the fuel for the fire, the creative fire, while I was doing my doctoral research. And then that later got published in the book, Tracking the Wild Woman Archetype. So of course, have to give more than a nod to Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes because of her beautiful insight and generous contribution and labor of love that became what we now know as the Wild Woman Archetype. But that was back, gosh, I don't even know how many decades ago, but quite a few decades ago, that she was bringing that back into consciousness for us. So like many women, I was very much, as a younger woman, in the paradigm of wholeness was equated to having a husband and 2.5 kids and a dog and a white picket fence. And that was the dream I had bought into that was going to create happiness, wholeness, safety, security, completion, all of those things. And so I, being quite goal oriented, managed to achieve that very effectively. Had a, on the outside, everything looked very picture perfect. And it was that kind of domestic experience, what happens inside those walls is very private and people don't know and from the outside. And so we had, my ex-husband and I, we had created this beautiful looking life and a beautiful family. And there was just this discontent that it wasn't the right fulfillment for either of us. So we eventually divorced after 10 years of being together. And I think that experience of completing the socially accepted role as a woman, and then not having that sense of fulfillment afterward, or in fact, even having a sense of emptiness or longing that you can't quite put your finger on. That experience is very common, certainly for a lot of women at midlife, like around in their 30s. That's where that midlife awakening happens, where we start to realize, oh, the social paradigm that I had bought into isn't really aligned with who I am as a woman. And that's a consciousness shift that happens for many women and men as well. It's the individuation process. It happens at midlife, whatever age we want to call that. And so during that time, I did go back to school for my graduate studies at Pacifica Graduate Institute, where we studied depth psychology. And through that time, I was working with plant medicine and had done a ton of research, including scholarly research on plant medicines. And then by the time I was coming to write my dissertation, I was involved in what we would now call a situationship. We didn't have that term back then, but it was an undefined, ambiguous situation with lots of love and lots of longing and lots of desire, lots of unmet needs, lots of feelings of unrequited love and feelings of rejection. Like just the whole gamut of emotions was kind of laid out, to be dealt with. And in dealing with all of those complicated emotions, I was brought into having to sort out my values, my ideals, my hopes, my dreams, what actually belonged to me personally and authentically. And that is the value of these transformative, very difficult feeling relationships, is that we step out of the social expectations and we come into, okay, what is truly mine? What is authentic? What is innate in me? And so that's the wild woman, is that what is my innate, wild, natural essence of who I am, right? So these complications invite us to figure those things out for ourselves. And it's quite unique for every person.
So I like to start with guests kind of laying the groundwork of definitions. And why don't we start with, just because, we can all use words and, these catchy words, but we have to make sure we're talking about the same thing with everybody, all the listeners and viewers as well. So all of us are on the same page. So let's start with wild. Okay. So in your book, you actually quote the Oxford Dictionary defines wild as uncivilized, rude, resisting constituted government, unrestrained, dissolute, insubordinate, violent, destructive, cruel, and unruly. Okay, so the implication here is that if somebody is wild, they're basically a threat to the current system. So it's considered a bad thing. Okay, so how would you like to define the use of the term wild today?
Wild, as in wild woman, I would say, and we'll come back to that because it is relevant, is who an individual is at their most authentic self. So one of the leading questions I had was from Simone de Beauvoir, which was over 100 years ago, when she was exploring the question of who is a woman before she is made. So
Mm.
this premise that we are born into a patriarchal culture and system and multiple systems of structure and institution. And so we are never not in that water psychologically or culturally. We're always swimming in that patriarchal water. And so to find out who we are without that lens of patriarchy is, in my conclusion, ultimately impossible. But we can try. We can try to recognize, okay, at least we're in this patriarchal water. And what is mine in it? So, what belongs to me? And the wild part is what belongs to me. What is true for me? What is my innate truth? So, that applies to morality, ethics, values, desires, ideals, dreams. These are all very specific things that are unique to each person.
That's so great. It reminds me of the that saying, does a fish know it's in water? And
Exactly.
and what I'm hearing you say is basically it's like we are the fish and we become conscious that we're in water, and you're still in water, but at least you're conscious of it.
Yeah.
you know?
And if you can get some objectivity by like getting on the beach or jumping out of the water, you
Yeah.
then get a little bit more consciousness.
Uh-huh.
The more we can be observing, then
Yeah.
we're not caught in it. We
Right.
don't
Remove a
see it
little bit.
as
Yep.
truth, right? It's a truth, but it's not a whole truth. There's
Yeah.
multiple truths. This is the kind of illusion of truth, is that there's one. Even within an individual, we'll have various perspectives available to us. So Aphrodite will have one perspective, Artemis will have another. Both are true. They may not be aligned. They're probably not aligned, in fact. So they have
Yeah.
different vantage points. Now, the other thing is, I would say, is it is in fact subversive to the dominant culture in that wild, unruly, bad from the perspective of the dominant culture, because it creates disorder. And when we have disorder, we have, foundations and systems that come unraveled and unglued. So
Mhm.
we're in a very complicated time right now where we have things like democracy, which I happen to be a fan of, but all of these big systems are now kind of wobbly and shaky. So, how do we have justice and social justice unless we actually reimagine these systems and institutions to be more equitable and whole, right? So
Mhm.
we're
Mhm.
in it's a very complicated time in terms of reimagining society with our much bigger patriarchal institutions and systems. And again, I have to emphasize this. Patriarchy implies male, but we're talking about systems. We're not talking about men. We're talking about systems that historically have favored men. But there's obviously great men that are also doing like work of how do we reimagine a future going forward, right? So it really can't be about vilifying men. That's a big, I would say, anti-wild woman approach, which would be much more inclusive, right?
Completely agree. That is a major part of my message in my show as well, is that this isn't even about gender. This is a principle, it's an energy, it's an essence. God knows there's just as many men that are seeking the same thing as women are. And I say all the time, there's more that unites us than divides us. It's like our whole world, not even our culture, but our whole world is really needs a new myth. We're looking for that new mono myth. It's like it's all thrown up in the air. The wizard behind the curtain has been revealed, and everybody's rethinking everything. And who do I believe? What do I believe? Where do my beliefs even come from? What, and to your point, being wild, what is mine? And just even asking that question is the beginning, because I think a lot of it is we are the fish in the water. We're not conscious that we're in water until it starts with asking the question. Even if you don't have the answer, it's like just to have that awareness is the start.
Yeah. Yeah, the questions, they're so important, even if we don't get the answers, because it
Hmm.
leads us on the quest, right? And
Absolutely.
that's everything. That's everything. Yeah.
Well, I think too, right now it's pretty vogue with this whole wild woman thing. Like get images of like Burning Man and, girls with like pasties on their nipples and running around with face paint and, the crazy, right? Like Girls Gone Wild and all that, and just a free for all, right? And a lot of people do that. So I'd love for you to comment on any kind of reply to someone that might be listening or watching and going, like, I want to be civilized and have a certain amount of dignity and still be ladylike, but be in touch with my wild self. What do you think about that? Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Like all of it's possible. And that's kind of the nature of it, is like what is true for each individual person, right? And there might be a time that it might be right for a certain woman to be running around at Burning Man in pasties. In fact, that's a very Dionysian energy, and we
Yep.
probably need a bit more of it, but
Yep.
that's a whole segue.
True.
That kind of abandon. But that is not what actually defines Wild Woman. It's not the, college girls gone wild spring break thing at all. Like that's actually more feeding into the patriarchal narrative about objectification of the body, right? Where Wild Woman would be closer to soul and almost interchangeable as a word,
Yeah.
and often would be interchangeable. It's these terms are slightly ambiguous and they don't like to be delimited too much. The one thing I would say though is Wild Woman, as opposed to soul, is much closer to the body and the instincts and the archetypes. So we'll have a lot more reclaiming of the actual instincts that we feel and experience in our body. So that will be things like basic things like, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I need to move? How am I as a mother? Am I like parenting because I've read this book and it's supposed to be to follow these rules? Or am I parenting because I know my child needs something right now, and I actually do know what that is on some very instinctual level. So parenting instincts, partnering instincts, instincts for sex, which is a really big one for women because women's sexuality has been so oh God, complicated, shamed, purified, objectified, like
Mhm.
just this host of like incompatible things that all come
Controlled.
controlled, that all come from patriarchal lenses,
Hmm.
including from women. Our mothers, aunties, grandmothers often pass on those
Yeah.
messages, right? So reclaiming our own sexual desire is a massive part of reclaiming our bodily instincts and wildness, but not for the sake of, girls gone wild for the, spring break party. Like it's from
Yeah.
a place of what's actually true for each woman. All these instincts are closely related to the wild woman archetype because they come from the body.
Yes. And I'll just say with the sexuality thing, I just love that you use the word reclaiming it, because it's like reclaiming your own body sovereignty, like your own right to pleasure. Women have such a hard time with the whole self care, pleasure thing, guilt. I grew up Catholic, guilt. And sex for me and the whole sexuality, sexual attractiveness, I'm not ashamed to admit now, as a full grown woman who was more in myself and my center, that it was more for what I could get from the man and using it to attract men rather than for my own gratification. You know what I mean? It was more like an ego thing of being wanted and desired and all that, rather than having sexual relations to explore my own body, my own pleasure, for my own pleasure's sake, nothing to do with if he's liking it or not, just be a little self oriented. And that whole aspect of using it as an access to the divine. I
Right.
mean, come on, what about all that? We're not taught any of that. And all the ancients knew. I mean, they revered the womb, the goddess, and the entrance of temples and caves and everything were shaped like the vulva. I mean, the Vesica Pisces and all that. I mean, it just goes way, way back because they knew that it was a portal to the divine through the feminine.
Right.
That completely has been washed away. So hopefully
Completely.
we're
And I think out
reconnecting.
of fear of the power of
Yeah.
the female body and that feminine energy
Yeah.
to create, right? Like create new life is it's pretty amazing. And not just literally, but just that creative energy in terms of we're always creating and creating life as we go.
So, did you have to really work on yourself reclaiming your own wild woman through that transition that you had? And could you share with us maybe the practical tips for the rest of us on how you did that?
Yeah, and so that's back to those like kind of basic things like so reclaiming the instincts. What am I feeling right now in my body? And just like really checking in with those things. What is this complexity that this person is bringing up for me? What is that about? Is it mine or is that a social thing? And here's an interesting one. I can't help myself but mull over things. So an interesting one of late, a very popular relationship counseling model is attachment theory about anxious attachment and avoidant
Yep.
attachment. And I've been thinking about that quite a lot, um, especially in terms of situationships. And in some ways, I think they don't have a place in romantic love. And the reason for that is what somebody is trying to do, with the boundaries of, okay, if the avoidant person behaves this way, then you need to do this, this, and this in order to create safety and security. It's all about creating safety and security
Yep.
for the incompatible match of the avoidant and anxious person. And if we're actually in a place of love, in that really expansive um, definition of the term, maybe the way like Rumi or Hafiz or any of the mystic poets talk about love, we're not trying to create safety because there is no danger. We're just loving, right? And so, like, so much of the models of romantic love these days are built around fear. But I think the opposite of fear is love. And so, if we can just be in this place of compassion and loving, whether or not we need that person in our life or choose to have that person in our life, we're at least not in a place of fear, so I feel like I got a little bit on a sidetrack there.
No, I love this. And I'm going to do another confession because this is what happens on my show. It's like my whole life is out there, but I'm just going to go with it. That, to me, it's like you can't truly fall in love. I mean, there's the expression, you're falling in love. I mean, visualize falling, right? You're out of control. You're helpless. You're not safe. You're falling. God knows what's going to happen, right? So when you truly open your heart, you inherently aren't safe, at least not initially. It's very scary to truly love. And I don't know who's listening, but I'm just going to say I've truly been in love. I mean, real deep love, Stacey, twice in my life. Twice. And particularly the second one was relatively recently. And I remember the beginning of the relationship, and I was scared to death. I was like really not comfortable because I'd come from a relationship where I kind of, lack of a better term, kind of had the upper hand a little bit. A lot of times relationships aren't equal, whatever. But this was like, oh, I was a goner. Like I knew right away. I was like, oh boy, I'm going in, and I was so vulnerable and so uncomfortable with that. But so to your point, it makes me think, yeah, true love requires a lot of courage to truly love because you are vulnerable. You aren't safe. Maybe eventually you'll become safe as you establish trust and responsibility and trustworthiness. But at least in the beginning, don't you think it really requires not being safe? 'Cause you don't know.
It is, and yet it absolutely. And I think what we're surrendering to is not the other person, but to love itself,
Yeah.
right? And so if we can
Mm,
trust that and trust that
yes.
that which we can't really name. I'm just calling it love. We call it God, creator, source, self. We call it soul, all kinds of things. If we trust that we're surrendering to that, then it can be like easier, you know? It's
That's
vulnerable.
beautiful. That's
There's no way
beautiful.
to not be vulnerable in it.
Yeah.
But I guess as a spiritual person, perhaps, or soulful person, it's easier for me to trust love and my connection to it because I trust what my body tells me now, having reconnected with the wild woman, that I can be like, okay, I need to fall into this and just let that happen rather than resist, which I would have done in my 30s, you know?
And that's spoken like the true Aphrodite archetype, what you just said. Love for love itself. And as you mentioned in the beginning today, you are now really more embodying your Aphrodite energy. And I know we're going to get back into that in a moment, but that I just think you so beautifully articulated it for us that that's what it's like, everybody, to really be in that Aphrodite energy. That's all about love. And it's just it. It's really not about the other person at all. you
No,
know?
it's not.
Yeah.
They are the catalyst, and it couldn't happen without that other person.
Yeah.
And we do not choose that other person. Like you said, you've been in
Yes.
love twice. I've probably been in love twice. It's a blessing when it comes,
Yep.
or a curse, depending on your perspective,
Yep.
your experience of trusting Aphrodite.
Yep.
Um, but it's not something we choose. It happens. And if we can fall back into that, recognizing the grace that it is,
Yep.
then you know what a blessing, right?
Yes.
Funny you brought in Aphrodite energy because this is all kind of a new shift for me, this
Mm.
perspective of love, you know, as opposed to attachment theory and boundaries. Um, and so I walk on the beach every day, which is Aphrodite's birthplace in the myth. She was
Yes.
born of the sea foam, and
The
I live close
ocean.
enough to the ocean that I walk on the ocean every day for about an hour.
Wow.
And I meditate and I pray and I give thanks. And I've come to just have this wonderful romantic love affair with the Pacific Ocean. I'm just like so enamored. And as I'm out there praying and just connecting, this is where these ideas around just trusting love come from for me. Like that's where those thoughts start, which is Aphrodite's birthplace, you know? So it's exactly right that that would be an Aphrodite energy to be falling into.
So perfect. It's just so perfect. So why don't we talk about your journey then? And or maybe we should back up and talk about archetypes first and explain the whole Artemis archetypal energy that you with Canada, and then because that'll give the foundation for the shift now to the Aphrodite energy of the beach and that.
Yes, within psyche, everybody's psyche, we have, let's say, half a dozen different archetypal perspectives available to us at any given time. Some are complementary, some are they can't coexist at the same time. And all they are stable energy patterns that exist in the external world, but they also, environment definitely matters, and they exist within the individual psyche. So as within, so without, and vice versa. Um, so as a stable energy perspective, the goddess Artemis, or some people know her as Diana, she represents the goddess of the virgin forest, of the moon. She's a huntress. She's separate from the world of men. So it's a very inward, like when we think of the forest, that's symbolic of the soul. Depth psychology is all about symbolism and metaphor. We work a lot with dreams for that reason. So she's kind of the guardian of the inner self that cannot be violated. And so that's a time for like being in nature, connected to nature. It's in the forest, the rivers, trees, all the little forest creatures. So I spent 23 years in the mountains of Canada in a very small town, two very small towns actually at different times. And the love interest at that time after my marriage was what I refer to in the book as a wild mountain man. He was very much a mountain athlete, wild man. In terms of avoidance structures, I experienced him as being quite avoidant, but that actually probably wasn't entirely true, that lone
Oh
wolf
boy.
archetype. And so those environments, kind of that particular time anyway, really brought me back into myself and exploring my own wild nature. And so then that was a long time to be in that energetic space and field and time. And so the time just presented very quickly. In fact, it was a dream that out on the horizon, I might move to California. Um, I have a 18-year-old son, and it was just suddenly time. It was like, okay, he said, why don't we go to California now? And I was like, oh, well, why don't we? And so we just started exploring it and kind of like falling in love. We just sort of fell toward it, and it just kind of kept unfolding and coming together. And we ended up in Los Angeles, which I would not have picked as my first choice. I would have thought it would have felt too big and busy coming from a very small, wild
Yeah.
town. I live near the beach and I absolutely love it here. It's a whole different experience. There's so much Aphrodite energy, and being near the Pacific and making sure I get time to be there, and the marine life and all of those different wonderful ways of connecting with nature. It's a very different kind of experience of nature. And psychologically, it's just a very different kind of energy. So I find myself very interested in a new way of physically presenting myself and experiencing, clothes and fashion and all of these different, the external is starting to shift as well too. And there is a lot of Aphrodite energy here. Of course, LA is famous for, the artifice, let's call it. But I think ultimately there's just naturally a lot of really beautiful Aphrodite energy here. Like this does feel like that's a center for that. Aside from all of the maybe fake emulations of it, there is an authenticity to it as well.
Could you give us some specific examples as to that so we can really hone into what you're referring to with Aphrodite energy there? Be an
So
example of
Aphrodite
how
is
it
the
was different.
goddess of love, beauty, and sexuality. People have a lot of uh, freedom, I'm going to say, in terms of sexual expression here. So
Yeah.
it's not very repressed or contained. It feels just very, very, very free. Whereas when it's in an Artemis environment, it's not. It's like athletic clothes. She's a huntress. Like it's much more, Arcteryx and Patagonia and those kinds of things. Where when it's Aphrodite energy, for example, it's like sexy bikinis in the summer and kind of gauzy clothes that don't show very or don't hide very well. Like there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
that mystique that goes on with the clothes. And then, of course, the attention to just one's appearance. People care about that here. They do lashes and they do their hair and they do their makeup in particular ways where Artemis energy, none of that's happening, right? You would never wear high heels in Artemis country, partly because it wouldn't be practical. And then in Aphrodite country, like, of course you would. That would just be the most natural thing, right? So these are just sort of off the cuff examples of how that plays out.
So what we're talking about, Stacey, are my two all-time favorite goddesses. My two primary archetypes personally. And I've always found it very interesting that, well, first of all, I named my show Awakening Aphrodite because for me, I lived the first half of my life predominantly in my head, like so many women did, in the patriarchal culture, good, bad, or indifferent. I was daddy's little girl. I worked really hard. I did all that stuff, achieve this and that, push it. All that's great. But unfortunately, it was at the expense of all my feminine self. So I brought in Aphrodite back on board to help integrate and be more whole. So that's the name of my show. So it's the whole journey from metaphorically the head to the heart. And needless to say, I've always identified with Artemis ever since I was a little girl. And the more that I've studied her, the more I'm like, my God, that is like me. I mean, I have 4 dogs. I mean, the whole thing. I live on 10 acres. I mean, like, That's me, nature girl. But I got to tell you too, I I aspire to Aphrodite. I mean, and she's always been in me as well. Back to our original discussion, maybe it was repressed sexuality based on my upbringing, but she's still there. And I very much identify with being a feminine woman. And I, like I read in your book, I know with the women's groups or meetings that you have, you guys enjoy talking about all things women and kids and dogs and whatever, but you also sometimes like going out to dinner and dressing up in high heels. And I'm the same, and I don't know if all the women in the world are like that, but I guess what I'm getting at is I find personally, Stacey, I'm always walking that balance between Aphrodite and and Artemis. Is it safe to say they're a little bit in opposition? Because one is such a tomboy, wilderness, like I'm a farmer. I wear the same clothes for 3 days when I'm working on my chicken coop, like all that stuff. God forbid, no makeup. But you better believe if I'm going out on a date, I absolutely love doing my hair, lashes, whatever. I don't know. What do you think about that? Because for me, it's always walking that fine line, depending on the day.
Yeah, I totally agree. Aphrodite for me is not, it's a new energy. It's not one I've been close to my whole life. So I'm just having like so much fun discovering this new energy,
Yeah.
which wouldn't have happened if I wasn't in LA. That didn't exist to the same degree in Santa Barbara, for example, where I probably would have gone. So yeah, they're not current concurrent modes of
Yeah.
consciousness. You can only be in one. So they can both exist within your psyche, but you can only be in one at a time, right? So like, yes, when you're building the chicken coop, you're going to be in your hunter boots and you're going to be out there with your, Carhartts and jeans and doing all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And then when you're in your Aphrodite, you're going to be getting your like pretty oils and all the makeup and all the accoutrements and all
Jewelry.
that kind
Yep.
of fun stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they're just they're not concurrent modes of consciousness, but they can coexist within the same psyche. They just don't happen at the same time. Interestingly, they're also both virgin goddesses. So is Athena. And that's interesting because that means that what virgin means is not sexual purity. What it means is women who are whole unto themselves. So these very, very powerful goddesses and energies are whole and complete unto themselves. They are not reliant on a male or the male world for their identification. So
Yes.
Hera, for example, is the goddess and the archetype of the wife. Her identification requires that there's a man. So Zeus is her philandering husband. Eye roll, please.
Yep.
So
Cue eye roll.
yeah, most of the other goddesses are not virgin goddesses, but these
Hmm.
these three in particular, Athena being goddess of justice and wisdom, uh, they are they are virgin goddesses. Aphrodite renews her virgin status, her virginity in the spring, every spring. So she goes in the water. So that's a way that she renews it. That's a nice ritual too for women. As we're reclaiming our feminine, a lot of what we reclaim is ritual and ceremony, intuition, instincts, as I mentioned, rethinking our values and so on. And so a nice ritual in the spring to reclaim sovereignty, regardless of whether you're partnered or not, is, dipping in a spring or cold water, even just putting your feet in it or something along those lines, right?
I love that. That's great. Yes, and it's very interesting that you mentioned about the virgin thing because Dr. Jean Shinoda Bolin, who was on my show, an amazing show, and I'm sure you know her well, right? Prolific author and Jungian analyst, and really a pioneer for women's studies and activism. Um, she talks about how the three virgin goddesses and makes it very clear this is nothing to do with sexuality and intercourse. This has to do with being sovereign unto yourself, and something that I think is so important. I didn't have that. I mean, I was getting my value from external validation and approval and all that stuff the first half of my life. And what a difference. Pulling that sovereignty, that orientation back inward. And I love that about Artemis is that she's, some say, just as gorgeous as Aphrodite,
That's right.
but her beauty is beauty for herself and unto itself and independent and not for men. You know, it's not for men to look and be like, oh my, you're so beautiful. I'm enjoying looking at how beautiful
They
you are.
get killed if they look.
Yeah, right. There you go. Yeah, so it's a whole different ballgame, everybody. It's not about not being beautiful. Most women want to be, and there's no shame in it. It's just about where the motivation lies, where, what it's all about. And I don't know if you want to speak to that, but I also want to tap into the beautiful things that you talk about, being in service to beauty. You talk about that. This is so awesome. I love that you talk about this. If you want to share that with us.
Yeah, being in service to beauty. What would I like to talk about? Yeah, I mean, that's up there. Gosh, beauty. I don't even know where to start. Beauty, gratitude, love, all of those I would give a capital letter to. They are ways of being in the world where we're honoring that which is greater in in a way that's maybe not spiritual and transcendent and bypassing, but being really present with what is. And beauty, like you said, Artemis is known to be as beautiful as Aphrodite. Aphrodite is the goddess of love, beauty, and sexuality. That extends to art, jewelry, culture. Natural beauty belongs to Artemis. Um, but like I like to go to the Getty Museum. It's full of beauty. That's very Aphrodite. And of course, the Getty Villa overlooks the ocean. Like that's just a
Yeah.
Aphrodite place, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, when we see beauty, not just not just that shell of beauty, but the like deeper beauty that comes from within, that emanates from within. And I know that sounds so cliche, but you've when it's there, you know it and you feel it, and just appreciating that and
Yeah.
being grateful for that. Those are all feelings that really open our heart. Beauty,
Yeah.
it's like
Mm-hmm.
just pausing to look at a beautiful flower that's opening, or a hummingbird. These are things I do every day. They open the heart, kind of the way gratitude opens the heart. When we pray with gratitude, giving thanks. When we pause to see the beauty around us, whether that's a person or art or flower, whatever it is, just it all opens the heart. It opens us up to love so much more.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to be love in the world, those of us that are in service to beauty are usually in service to love. Then
Yes.
how can we be vessels of that each day, right? How can we serve love? How can we serve beauty each day?
See, I love that we're talking about this because I think the immediate go to for a lot of us when we think of beauty is we do think of the superficial. We think of, let's just say women, right? Women with their hair done and a nice outfit and all put together and, stylish, whatever. And wow, she's so beautiful and all that. But it's like we're talking about, I mean, you just have a beautiful gesture, like opening your definition, your awareness to the existence of beauty in so many different forms. It's so much more than just superficial appearances. Like you're saying, it's a feeling or a gesture, or someone says something that's really beautiful, or a beautiful moment, or like I really enjoy putting together flowers because I like having a beautiful house. And it's not because I'm materialistic. It's because I feel like cultivating beauty in my environment is part of enabling more love in my life because it makes me feel nurtured. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel happy, supported, uplifted. It's your, we all know environment is an ingredient to health. It's very, very important. So I'm just saying for all of us listening and watching, there's no shame in wanting beautiful things and wanting to be around things that you think are lovely because they make you feel good, and it's all about the energy, right? And it's a momentum thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think something too that I think is important is particularly for women reclaiming the wild woman, is sourcing their own energy from their own beauty.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
maybe you're having a day, because we all have these days where we're feeling down or frumpy or bloated or cranky or had a bad dream and having a dream hangover. Like, take some time to source some energy from yourself, from Aphrodite, but from yourself, to connect with your own beauty, because so often women have trouble connecting to their own beauty
Yeah.
because of all of the social conditioning and messages around that. And so the more we're able to appreciate our own beauty, then the more we're able to reflect that out in the world. And maybe that just translates as a warm smile to somebody at the coffee shop or whatever it is, then it's contagious. It's passing on and on and on. So it's important on those days that you can to tend to those things.
That's such an important point. And so it makes me think, okay, so how can we do that? How can we connect to our own beauty when we don't feel beautiful, or comparison is the thief of joy, as they say. We're looking at everyone else and thinking, oh my gosh, she's so pretty and I hate my nose or whatever, and we don't feel beautiful. And to me, I would think cultivate things that make you feel nurtured. What I would do is I would take a shower, or I might, do some kind of physical exercise, definitely nature, whatever. For me, showering is it's a state changer. I feel clean. It literally psychically washes away energy, pulls in good energy. I feel good. My skin's clean.
Yeah.
Maybe music. I'm just thinking of ways that I might, when I don't feel beautiful, connect to my own beauty. And it kind of starts. What do you think?
Yeah, and so definitely those kinds of things, like get out of bed, make your bed, have a
Yep.
shower, do your hair, put some lip gloss on if that's
Yep.
all you can do. Put something on that you don't feel frumpy in.
Yeah.
Try
Yes. Uh-huh.
if you can. Do your dishes, like tending the house.
Yep.
Often, if we clean our environment at least a little bit, it sorts out whatever's going on in our head. So
Mm-hmm.
if we can tend the external, it'll also help with the internal. Get your nails done. That's been one of my favorite therapies. Even when I was in Artemis country, I used to love going to get my nails done.
I'm
Well,
admiring your nails. It's so
thank
funny you mentioned that. I was like, oh, she's got great nails.
it's been just one of my favorite sources of therapy, because I see them all day long, and I'm
Yeah.
like little bouquets at the end of my fingers. They make me just so happy. So,
That's
like
awesome.
little things that can bring joy. Obviously, not everybody's going to feel that way about their nails, but little things that can bring you joy. Get flowers. Like, that's the same kind of example. Get yourself flowers, go cut some flowers,
Mm-hmm.
just that self-care, or just taking some time to have a few really deep breaths and feel into your body, and just whatever you can be grateful for in your body that day.
Yes, and just the feeling of nurturing yourself, pampering yourself. I mean, that's really taking your sovereignty back too, and is
Yes.
going to start a good momentum. So the wild woman, I mean, it's safe to say, I know Dr. Jean Shinoda Boland talks about the indomitable spirit, which is the Latin root is untamable, basically, is what that word means, that you can't domesticate her. And one of the things that struck me about your book, Tracking the Wild Woman Archetype, is you talk about that many people struggle with really separating the domestic and the wild natures that are in us. It's like those, what's that saying? You get two wolves, the dog and the wolf that are fighting each other, and you were caught in the middle. But you mentioned that here's the surprising part. Part of the wild nature of women is domestic life. You made me think of that when you said do the dishes. This is such a great point. I would love for you to explain to us. Um, so part of our wild nature as women is doing domestic things consisting of a home, a family, community, and belonging. The real problem comes from restricting women's behavior and freedom, as in the coming and going from the house. We must let go of controlling the feline's activities. So, domestic things, dishes, sweeping floors, doing laundry, is part of the wild woman. This is huge. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was huge for me too. It was definitely one of those aha moments. At that time I owned half wolf, half husky
Oh, cool.
dog. Now I own a Chihuahua. I don't know.
Well,
Um,
you are changed. You're a different
yeah,
person.
you can
Wow.
see it in the transition from choice of pet
Yep.
and place. There is that, and again, back to connecting to the instincts. So when we find what's ours, so my first round of domestication, I just kind of did it because that was what society said I should do. And so that just seemed like the roadmap to follow. And so I did that, and then it wasn't fulfilling. There was like this niggling emptiness that felt like I was dying in it. It actually felt quite dramatic. Um, it eventually, not right away. And and then through like time, years down the road, I came to realize I do really value my home. My home is my sacred place. It's my
Yep.
safe place. I need it to be grounded. I need it to be clean. I need
Hmm.
order. I like things in my house that are meaningful, sentimental,
Yep.
symbolic to me. Um, I don't let people in my house very easily anymore. When I was in that initial domestication stage, we would have parties every week and that kind of stuff. And I could make martinis really well. Like none of that now. Now it's like a very safe
Yeah.
place, quiet place. There's
Hmm.
candles. People don't come in easily unless they're really coming into my inner life as well as my,
Yep.
you know. So it's this recognition that there's also an instinct in us for, I don't want to necessarily call it domestic life, but certainly stability, structure, grounding, home, place, belonging, all of those kinds of things. And probably domestic life can coexist with that. I think a woman has to go through the midlife crisis and awakening before domestic life and the wild woman can coexist within one, probably home and relationship as well.
It's
It's
a
very
very
difficult to
interesting
be
point.
in quite a traditional relationship structure, not having gone through the crisis and awakening, and have a sense of wholeness and completion and belonging.
Yeah, because you ideally we go through our individualization, hence Carl Jung's theory, prior to really finding our domestic life, our soul partner. I mean, ideally, because you can be a totally different person at the end of it. So you want to ideally do that first. So
Ideally, although I don't think it happens like
you're
that
right.
very often,
Yes,
because I
that's
think
right.
we have to go through that in
Yeah.
order to become, like, it's like we have to go through that rite of passage in order to recognize, oh, there's something more. In order to become ourselves, we have to go through that stage.
Yes. You know what else I was thinking was interesting about your story, Stacey, is that it's interesting how you basically were living your Artemis archetype first, then your Aphrodite. Most people in this day and age, I think, are opposite. They're more in their Aphrodite, but not, lack of a better term, in the good sense. They're more in the superficial Aphrodite thing, the external, sex, beauty, and all that. Not what we really think of as the real depth of Aphrodite and actuality. And then they leave it all, they leave it all and they go to the woods and then they're more in their connect with nature. And the next thing you know, they're grounding their feet on the earth and they plant a garden. And so they're more in their Artemis energy after. So it's just interesting that you kind of did it in the flip.
Yeah. And the other one that often happens first is the Athena energy or the scholar energy, because that trajectory is like you finish high school and then you go to university. So somebody might have been in that Athena energy for quite a while and then will shift probably predominant archetypes at that point.
Yeah.
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 There was a natural trajectory though, because I was in the Artemis energy. I was writing about love, even though I was living Artemis. And of course, it was this like frustrated love, which created a lot of heat for transformation.
Yeah.
And then after Tracking the Wild Woman came out, which I think was 2018, I was invited to teach at the school I had gone to, Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara. And then from that, I wrote my second book, which is Love and Soul Making, Searching the
Mhm.
Depths of Romantic Love. And so I I went like an even deeper layer into exploring romantic love as well, as a paradigm, like as a patriarchal institution, frankly, and then extending that further about the transformation possibilities through that. So that book came out, I think, 2 years ago now. And then I moved like at the end, like the launch of that book was during the time I was moving down to Los Angeles. So it was sort of like this completion of, okay, I don't have to keep studying that anymore. Now I just get to go and live Aphrodite energy down in Los Angeles and hang out at the ocean. That seems just great. So there was this evolution of the work and the goddesses at the same time.
Isn't that beautiful? And that's what happens in life, right? So what would you say, where are you at now, Stacey? What are you working on now, or what is really holding your interest, your passion, and what's developing in you now?
Yeah, it's definitely different. For the first time, I'm much more focused on pleasure. So bringing pleasure
Awesome.
back, and not just, physical, sensual pleasure, but just wanting more pleasure, more spaciousness, less goals, less achieving, less doing, less productivity. Again, all of those things belonging to that like internalized patriarch, right? Letting more and more of that go, and just trying to create more space and more spaciousness for spontaneity, the unknown, mystery, slowness. Naps, I've taken up napping occasionally. That's
Me
really fun.
too. Yep, me too.
That's really
And for
lovely.
me, it's a lot of it is the white space, not just jamming my schedule so tight, and just, yeah, letting myself breathe a little bit and taking those moments and just all those little things, and even if for the person listening or watching that doesn't have time to tie their shoes, but maybe even when you're taking your kids or they're not in the car yet, you're going to pick up your kids and you're by yourself, turning off the radio, opening the window, and just be conscious of the breath coming into your nose and feel your nostrils and feel your body. And, like sneak it in is all I'm suggesting, is like sneak in ways to feel more and embody more, back to your point about being in touch with our instinctual nature and our body, our body itself, getting out of that head.
Yes, yeah, so much about being in that sensate world can get us out of our head,
Yep.
and becoming aware of all the ways that we're conditioned to be very patriarchal in that
Yep.
kind of hyper productivity busyness,
Yes.
so really
Yes.
allowing ourselves to slow down, to be comfortable with unknown. I mean, that's so hard, being comfortable with the
Yep.
uncertainty and the unknown, but really essential as we're reclaiming our femininity. And that just happens in layers and layers and layers. It's not like that's a one-shot deal. So
And that's a hard thing to do, to overcome the programming of a lifetime of a Puritan ethic, that your value is based on your productivity and you wear your busyness like a badge of honor. Like, I'm so damn busy. I got so much going on. It's like, okay, and then it's like a shift, and like maybe that's not a good thing. Like, and I started to find myself saying in the last few years of my life, like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that person when a friend calls and I'm like, I only have a few minutes. I got, and I don't want to be that energy. And my dogs mirror it back to me. My children will mirror it back to us. Like, our energy is speaking before we do. And I love that you're saying that, because the busyness is often put coming from the outside, and it's like, well, as opposed to what's driving us from the inside. It's a hard balance, while still paying the bills.
it's a very hard
But
balance,
yeah.
and learning where we can say no, and figuring out our priorities, of course, back to the priorities.
Yeah.
That's really important. Having our boundaries with ourselves to say no, which means we're going to have to overcome the difficulty of disappointing other people. That's
Yep.
a huge growth edge, like there's so many opportunities for growth as women when we start to deconstruct this patriarchal socialization. Then we can just live so much more authentically, right? But it does mean we have to go through a lot of these hard, uncomfortable lessons.
And I love that you talk about the wild woman is very in touch with her boundaries, and hence the symbol of the bear. You know, the bear being Artemis's symbol. I mean, Artemis means bear, and you talk about how a mother bear is a very good role model for us in having healthy boundaries and taking a stand, and that hard no, that hard yes. I mean, it's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah, it is. It is. In the tale of Psyche and Eros, which is in both books, it's
Yeah.
been one that I've been living for quite a while. The final and four, I'll won't tell you the whole story at this point. You can read the book for that. But the final task of the impossible task, Psyche has to cross the river Styx. And to cross the river Styx, she has to reserve all of her energy for herself. She can't go rescue the drowning man. She can't rescue the old man who's dropped his bundle of sticks from his donkey. She has to keep all of that energy for herself, and she has to learn to say no in order to make that crossing. It's so important as women that we learn when we have to pull our energy in and keep those boundaries for ourselves. And it's a bit of a trial and error thing, and compassion, self-compassion is absolutely required because we're not naturally programmed or conditioned socially to do that, right? We're conditioned to overgive.
Being a martyr.
Being a martyr, burnout is
Mm-hmm.
huge.
Mm-hmm.
So then we have to, tune into our bodies and really practice developing those boundaries for ourselves.
And what I'll add to that too is remember, for all the moms with the young daughters and stuff, you are the example. So even if you do it for your kids, because you're teaching them how to have boundaries as a person, as a woman, it's a good example to be. So yeah, I mean, you help yourself with it, but you're ultimately helping your child, because that's what you're teaching them, right? Your example.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. This has been absolutely amazing. I have to let you go. Obviously, I could keep you here forever. Again, I just been looking forward to this for so long. I felt such a connection with your work and your philosophy, and so grateful for your contribution to all of us, and as you are traversing the path ahead of some of us. So this has just been a beautiful conversation. Is there anything that you'd like to add that you feel needs to be said today that would make you feel like it's just you want to say it?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, and the just wonderful kindred energy and being able to bring in these entities and speak through them to each other. That's beautiful. Um, Pieces about myself. I know you'll put this up on the notes, but my
Yep.
website is drstaceyshelby.com.
Yep.
That's Stacey Shelby. Um, and my work is as a depth psychotherapist. So I work with adults, both men and women. Interestingly, it's usually about 50% of each.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought I would mostly work with women, but
Yeah.
it's for most of my career, it's been fairly equal.
Wow.
Guiding people through that reclamation of themselves at usually midlife, the midlife awakening.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of information on my website, and
Yep.
this will be up on my website, lots of podcasts, and both the books are available up there. So
And
yeah,
your courses.
and my courses are on there. Yeah, so
And you do
there's a lot of free information on there as well for
yeah,
people.
your articles and stuff. And you do Zoom consultations privately with people.
That's right. I
Yeah.
work over Zoom. That's my primary work now. I used to do more teaching and various activities, but now that I'm paring down, my
Yeah.
primary work and only work is as a Zoom therapist all over the world, actually.
Any
Mhm.
more books coming down the pike, Stacey?
Well, I want to say no because I'm trying to just enjoy pleasure, but the truth is I also enjoy the engagement of Psyche. So I've got a manuscript that's about 130 or 40 pages of notes on the alchemy of love.
Ooh.
So that will be what is forthcoming. I don't know if I'll be 80 or if that'll just pour out of me in a year. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is what's coming next. But I'm not working on it actively right now. I'm just working on living and experiencing right now.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love it. Well, wow, Dr. Stacey Shelby, this has been truly a pleasure. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope it inspired you to tap into your wild woman self. It's in there, right, Stacey? It's in all of us.
In all of us, and even men, it's the wild man archetype. I just didn't feel qualified to write about it, but that is why I work with both men and women.
Yes, excellent. Well, I'm sure, like I mentioned, there's more that were similar. It's just, a different expression of it, but ultimately we're all human.
Yeah, the root is different for men.
Oh, okay.
Because of socialization. They have different messages, right? Which is why I am leaving that in the good hands of some to take that up.
I've had some great guys who do men work on the show, like Mike Salemi and just a few of the others that are fantastic. But I would imagine ultimately it's the same in that it's the journey back to their true self.
That's the same.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's the same. But the wounding from patriarchy is to overcome. So yeah.
Sure. And but we all ultimately want to go home to the truth and to love and to supporting each other in harmony. So it's all beautiful. Thank you for the work you do, Stacey. Everybody, if you enjoyed the show, please let us know. You can check us out on our social media. If you enjoyed it, you can tag us. We'd love to come say hi to you, share the show with a friend, and we'll see you next time on Awakening Aphrodite.
Good. Thanks, Amy.
Would you like to support my mission to help empower people all over the world to be all of who they truly are? If so, please subscribe to the show, leave a review on iTunes, and share it with a friend. And if you're looking to take immediate action to align your energy and optimize your health, visit amyfournier.com. Thanks for listening to Awakening Aphrodite. Let's awaken her together in you. I'm your hostess, Amy Fournier, and I already can't wait to be with you again and for you to hear what I have planned for the next show.
Thanks for listening to Awakening Aphrodite with Amy Fournier. To learn more about Amy, check out her website, amyfournier.com. That's AMYFOURNIER.com. You can also check out Amy's live and on-demand virtual fitness and yoga classes and sign up for her newsletter to receive a free mini ebook of 3 of her top tips for making holistic health a lifestyle. Again, that's amyfournier.com and get your ebook sent to your email immediately. Connect with Amy on the daily on Instagram at FitAmyTV, FITAMYTV, and watch many of the podcast episodes and subtopic clips on her YouTube channel, which is also FitAmyTV. Enjoy, and we'll see you next time on Awakening Aphrodite.